Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this webinar called Listen with Love, Speak with Love. We really appreciate that you've taken the time to be with us here, and we hope that this session will be very enriching for you. To begin with, I'd like to introduce the lovely Liz. She is the director of the Heartful Communication program. She's also a heartfulness trainer and has been a nonviolent communication trainer for about 20 years. We all, the youth representatives here, we all actually began our journey in nonviolent communication, or NVC, with Liz at Omega School when we studied there, and Liz worked there for a few years. Meghana and Santnam, would you like to say a little more about yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Meghana. I am a corporate lawyer by profession, and I'm joining all of you from Hyderabad, India.
Hi everyone, I'm Santnam. I'm still a student. I recently graduated from IIT Bombay with a degree in energy engineering, and I'm going to be pursuing my master's in material science at the University of Pennsylvania this fall. So I've been practicing heartful communication for the last 7 months, and in my observation, one of the major things that has changed in my own life is that I've become a lot less reactive in my interactions thanks to heartful communication.
Hi everyone, I am a corporate lawyer by profession, and I'm joining all of you from Hyderabad, India. Like Deeksha mentioned, I did start my nonviolent communication journey almost 11 years ago when I was in school. And I remember Chariji saying this quite a lot back then. If you mean what you say and say what you mean, that is the utter truthfulness of a human being. And the offerings that NVC and Heartfulness have provided have supported me to be truer to myself and to get a step closer to the kind of person I aspire.
And I am a psychologist. I'm joining from Berlin, and I've just completed my master's in the psychology of learning. Professionally, I've worked in the area of corporate learning and development. So I guess you're pretty eager to hear from Liz. So we're going to ask her to introduce what heartful communication is. Liz, could you tell us how it came about and why it's so important for us?
Okay, can I just first say how delighted I am? Thank you for inviting me to it's your webinar, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's total delight to be here with people who were originally students with me. Just lovely. So, I guess about a couple of years ago, when I was in Kanha and talking with Darji, and he was talking a lot about his wish for much greater harmony in the mission, and for there to be a kind of alignment of the inner condition with our outer behavior. He was noticing there was quite a gap in what happened inside and what was happening outside. And then a little later, he mentioned how he was very moved by a message that came from Babaji from the brighter world, when Darji had been wondering what Sahaj Marg would be known for in the future. And Babaji said it will be known for unity. So, if you like, this is, so much of Darji's vision and wish, isn't it? For more harmony, for there to be unity amongst us, and that heartful communication, with its blend of heartfulness with nonviolent communication, can offer a contribution towards more oneness, towards more harmony, which we know it's what we're going to be exploring, isn't it, in the session. So I was amazed actually when I was in Canada that he knew about nonviolent communication and about Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Perhaps could we put a slide up so that you can all see? Here he is. So that here's Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who I was very fortunate to be able to study with, and as the originator of nonviolent communication. So his teachings, his approach have been woven together with our heartfulness practices and tools to produce what we now call, what Darji calls, heartful communication. And Marshall Rosenberg, I guess you could say he wanted to find a way that could be taught, could be learned in a systematic way that would help us to stay in touch with what he believed to be our essential compassionate nature, to stay in touch with that even under pressure. So you could say that we start with this premise that we have a compassionate nature originally, but we've been educated out of it. So he created processes that were reliable under pressure to help us to be able to express ourselves and to listen, as Darji says, with love. So actually NVC, as well as heartfulness, has a spiritual basis. Because for Marshall, he said NVC is the manifestation of what I understand love to be. So they have that in common. This is, you know, love in action. And what he said was that if we are able to be connected to what he calls beloved divine energy, in other words, God, then human beings enjoy contributing to the well-being of others more than anything else. So do you see, it's that, and Darji said that heartfulness and NVC are hand in glove. This was Darji's own phrase. So we have these similarities of heart connection, that there are outer tools as well in heartfulness and in NVC, that we're moving from thinking to feeling. We can perhaps take down the slide of Marshall now. Thank you, Ananya. And this focus on oneness, on how we can really connect with each other and feel, it's like much more what we have in common than what divides us. And we're going to see how this works, is how heartful communication can contribute to this oneness and the longings that we have deep down. I think the other thing, Deeksha, that I want to say is that at this time, you know, this current time that we're in the world right now, which is deeply traumatic for so many people. You know, here we are in the midst of this global pandemic. So many people feeling isolated, anxious, scared. I mean, has there ever been a time when we needed to be reaching out to each other to feel togetherness, you know, to feel our oneness more than now? You know, we've lost so much outer security. So the need for heartfulness and for heartful communication, like it's really pressing now that we can find ways to develop our inner resources, to reach out to each other, to support each other in that harmonious, loving way. So, and you know, if either we're isolated or we're sort of stuck with people, the same people for 24 hours a day for weeks on end, and you know, that in itself creates a lot of tension. So we need to have processes that can help us to interact in this much more loving, understanding way. So that, I think, is probably what it's all about. And what Darji said recently, which I found very moving, he said that the impact of heartful communication is going way beyond communication itself, and it's having an enormous effect on people's overall spiritual condition. I found that really very moving and very wondrous, that he's working in this way, that he's able to work through heartful communication. But that's enough for me for the moment, because I mean, you three have been learning this. You've been working with it. So, what do you all think are the key elements of heartful communication? Maybe you could talk about that for me.
For me, I think it's helped to develop a sort of self-awareness, to even recognize certain patterns and habits of how we communicate with each other. And then in trying to practice it, I've realized that patience is very important. And even when we understand our current patterns, it's not that the transformation happens unconsciously or instantly, but it's something that takes time and effort, and we need to keep reminding ourselves about this and not getting too frustrated or beating ourselves up about it if we don't get it right away. But it takes time for the results to show, and then when those results do unfold, it's very satisfying.
I've had some really interesting experiences with heartful communication, and I can really relate to what Deeksha said, that it can be really satisfying when you see it in action. But I'd like to really emphasize, for me personally, I think deep listening is something that has made a huge change. So nowadays in my interactions, I'm a lot more mindful of what the other person is going through. I take some time and just try and think about, okay, why is this person saying this? What might be their need behind it? What motivation might be behind that particular action or what they're saying? And that's really helped me not judge people immediately. And that's been really valuable for me.
For me, I've noticed that heartful communication also brings about this approach that allows one to be more authentic, to themselves, because it helps. So what I was trying to say is that this approach that allows us to be more authentic also works in a way, because it helps one recalibrate their intentions, to use communication to connect with the other person and themselves, and move beyond judgments and interpretations of what might be right and wrong, and find a space to connect with the other person truly. Speaking of interpretations, Liz, what do you think are the problems or concerns with our usual way of communication?
Okay, I love what you all said, and so what you're mentioning right there, Meghna, about judgments, moving beyond judgments. You say, okay, what's the problem right now? With the way we communicate, we could probably take it down to just almost that, the judgmental, blaming mindset, right? That this is how we've been educated, isn't it? It's not how we naturally are. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But our education, our cultural conditioning has brought in this very strong blame and shame. Oh, I mean, it's tragic. The blame and shame that is so much part of our conditioning and our thinking. So, I mean, I bet if I was to ask all of you, you could tell me experiences of this, of being blamed and shamed. I certainly was, particularly as a child, and very painful to recall. And I heard an interesting little story, which I'll just quickly tell, because I think it illustrates what we're talking about. This cultural conditioning, where somebody who's in our heartful communication team, her daughter, who I think at the time was only 5, was at school, and her teacher set up a running race. And she said, okay, the child who wins this race, I want you to grab as many chocolates as you possibly can. And there was a bowl at the winning line. So the children set off for the run, and my friend's daughter won the race. Now, she didn't do what the teacher said. She didn't grab a whole lot of sweets. She just took one. The teacher scolded her, was angry with her for being disobedient. So when when this poor distressed child went home and told her mother what happened, she said, but, so why, why did you only take one when you'd been told to take lots? And she said, because if I had taken lots, there wouldn't have been enough for everybody else. So do you see why I'm telling this little story? Is because here was a child in her natural state, caring for, having concern for others, and being educated out of that, being told, no, become a winner at the expense of others. So this, this judgmental mindset, we're talking about thinking in terms of somebody being good, bad, right, wrong, normal, abnormal, focus on winning, which means that others lose. Competition, competition when others maybe suffer as a result. Do you see? So this whole way of thinking is what Marsha Rosenberg called playing the game of who's right. And I think if any of us reflect on that, I can certainly think of times when I have still wanted to be right, to kind of insist, if you like, on a point, winning a point. But this is part of our way of thinking. So, if I'm right, then somebody else becomes wrong. Do either of us have peace in our hearts if we're playing that so-called game? Probably the answer is no. We don't. How do we each feel inside? Has it hurt our hearts to be always wanting to be right, to win? You see. So instead of having a connection with people, we wanting to correct. So with Heartful Communication, we talk about what's our intention. The intention is so important, and our intention is to connect at the heart level with myself, with others, not to correct. Especially, I guess, when we're interacting with people who are very different from ourselves. But the differences are not the problem. And I've found this lovely quotation by Margaret Wheatley. And if you could put the slide up, you'll see this. And she was saying very simply, but it's very profound, I think. It's not our differences that divide us. It's our judgments about each other that do that. You see, it's like differences is not the problem. Trees don't judge, difference. They're all different, but they don't sit there judging. So it's the judgments which is reflected in our language. Thank you, Ananya. Isn't it? We think in language. So Heartful Communication is addressing language as well as intention and approach in a condition and so forth. So it's also addressing language because this is how we think. So in a way, we're creating our reality, aren't we? We're creating our reality through language. Language shapes our perception. So if I hear somebody say, oh, he's really lazy, you see, I'm going to get an immediate mental picture, a prejudice about that person, maybe before I've even met them. Or someone else said, oh no, she can't be trusted. You see, there's the thought, which then goes on to create a whole reality, which we then are often speaking from or coming to expect. We have interpretations going on. And part of this whole mindset that I'm talking about is that it relies on the use of fear, doesn't it? Anything to do with punishment and reward, it's using fear, not love. So with Heartful Communication, what we're trying to do is to come always from a place of love, which I'm really sure is our natural way of being. I mean, if you look at a lot of indigenous cultures, they don't have this same way of thinking as we do. I remember when I first came across the culture which is called Ubuntu. Some of you may well know about this, this African approach. It's like a philosophy, and we've got a nice little picture here. But what matters is the philosophy says, I am because we are, not I am because I am. In other words, interdependence. And we have so often almost worshipped independence, you know, that to become self-individuated. But the other way of seeing this is, are we interconnected so deeply, so networked together, that my well-being is completely dependent on your well-being? And this is the philosophy of Ubuntu. So, for example, instead of using punishment as we do to try to what you say, like reform people, make people better human beings, they have a wonderful process. If somebody's made a big mistake, what we would probably call a crime, they're not tried, you know, criminal justice system. That person sits in the middle of the community, and for 2 days, the community reminds that person of all the good they have done. I find it so moving that this is the response to a big mistake, what we would call a crime. It's like, let us remind you who you really are. Their way of thinking is you've temporarily forgotten your true nature, so let us remind you. Thank you, Ananya. So, you know, we are wired. We're wired for empathy. It's there. It's in our circuitry. It's in our brain. So, Heartful Communication has this focus on empathy, being able to understand ourselves, being able to understand others. And I think that you people are going to talk more about that, I think, in a moment, aren't you? And the basis of this is the inner condition. This is why heartfulness is so essential, our practice, and why Daji said to you all, if you remember, on your last call, he said, meditate, 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 didn't he? Or practice, practice, practice. So the basis of Heartful Communication is, for sure, the meditative condition, the bringing calmness, balance inside, so that can increasingly be manifested outside. Beyond these ideas of right and wrong, which is expressed so beautifully. I think a lot of you know this beautiful quotation, which I love, from Rumi, you know, the 13th century Persian poet and mystic. If we really take in these words, out beyond ideas, that is our thinking, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, in other words, beyond judgmental mind, there is a field, like a space, a completely different quality, different way of being. In that space, we can connect. I will meet you there. In that field, when we leave our heads and judgments behind, connect with our hearts, speak from our hearts, listen from our hearts. That's how we can really meet each other. Yeah, thank you. So I think you're going to tell us more, aren't you, now about this field of needs, one of you. Eggs?
Yes.
You're going to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you.
So this field of needs that Liz has been speaking about, where we try to connect with the other person and not get entangled in what is right and what is wrong, is actually a place of needs. Okay, so let me break this down a little more. In NVC, Marshall Rosenberg's approach, we find the possibility to go beyond all these judgments and conditioning and develop this compassion within us and be able to increase our understanding of what motivates a person to do something, right? This is a consciousness that is brought about where everything one does, one's behavior, one's speech, the words they use, even their thoughts, all of them have an underlying need or motivation or longing. And to fulfill this needs, people choose different approaches. So let us take a look at what these needs look like. So some of these needs and values are maybe acceptance, appreciation, equality, harmony, community. If you read through all of this, you can see a theme running here, right? There's a theme underlying all these values that are mentioned. The theme is that they are all contributing to enrich one's life, and these energies are in a way universal. Okay, so for instance, let's take a situation where a student skips a class, maybe. What could her underlying need be? Could they be longing for some rest, maybe, or even autonomy, right? Now, a teacher whose class the student missed might not agree with the way the student decided to fulfill this need within them. At the same time, I'm sure all of us could relate to this longing to take some rest, right? To want some autonomy in our lives. So how about we take a couple more examples to see what certain behaviors, what the needs could be underlying certain behaviors, right? So what do you think could be the underlying need for a volunteer who is working in heartfulness? Could it be to contribute and support the institute? It could even be of a personal growth, right? And with this need that is alive in a person and in a lot of us, we choose different to fulfill it, right? In another example, what happens when someone is yelling at you saying, "Leave me alone. Get out of here." Now the words that they've chosen could be something that you're not comfortable with. So it's about taking a step back and sensing into what might be motivating them to say this, right? Probably it could be that they are longing for some space at that moment. Another example could be when someone says, "I'm finally beginning to make friends here. I really enjoy my time." What could their need have been that was fulfilled, because of which, there is a positive reaction to it, right? Probably that need was inclusion, right? So thing is, everything that we do does have an underlying need, motivation that manifests into our behavior, right? Ananya, if you can put up the slide. Marshall Rosenberg also says that all human actions are an attempt to meet their needs. And the more you try to get into this consciousness and try to understand what these needs are, the more you'll be able to connect with the other person. And the tricky part is when we face difficult situations where we experience criticism maybe and judgments and even anger. And it is important to remember, especially in these times, that even underlying all these behaviors, it is a tragic expression of an unmet need. Now, Deeksha will take you guys into a journey where you would be going through certain examples and trying to spot the needs under these scenarios.
Yes, now that Meghna has done a few examples of how to spot the underlying need, we're going to invite you to try it out for yourself by going to menti.com. If you could open another tab on your laptop or open Menti on your phone. The code is in the description of the YouTube live video. So you would need to enter the code. You can see the code on the screen as well. 36755406. The situation is that Charlie is gossiping about Shanti when she isn't around. So what do you think could be some of Charlie's needs when he's doing that? I see validation, acceptance, finding wholeness within, attention, love, connection. Yeah, these are some great responses, especially I can see that you're leaning into the need for connection and the need for some sort of interaction, acceptance, attention, and love. It's some powerful guesswork happening. Attention and connection seem to be the strongest ones here. Let's move to the next question. A friend invites you to go bowling. What could their need be when they ask you to go out? It could be bowling, could be some other activity if you don't bowl. Why are they inviting you? Fear, that's an interesting one. Company, friendship, a partner, connection, belonging. Amazing. Company and belonging seem to be very strong, and connection as well. The need for some companionship. I also see fun, even though it's very tiny. I think that's a nice one as well. Friendship and companionship. Great. Let's try the next one then. This time you invite a friend to a party and they say no. Why do you think someone might reject such an invitation? What is the friend's need in this moment? There could be multiple needs, as we've seen. Some space. I see fun. Maybe they have a different idea of what fun is and they want to do something else in that time. Rest, yes. Personal space. Space seems to be getting bigger. Yeah. held up with something, or family. They could have something else that's a priority in the moment. Yes, I'm loving the fact that this is so easy for so many of you. Okay. Let's go to the next one now. Joe is seen bullying his juniors at college. What do you think Joe's needs could be that make him do such a thing? Wow, attention. Understanding, acceptance. These are not what we would usually think when we see someone bullying anybody. But when we take a moment to think about it, it seems that we're able to guess the underlying motivation behind his action, right? The need for attention, acceptance, respect. Recognition, absolutely. The need for recognition also could relate to the need to just be seen and to be heard. To feel like they matter, to feel like they exist and that people acknowledge them. All right, thank you very much for participating in this. So Liz, we've seen how we can understand the motivation, or guess into the motivation behind someone's behavior. We may not exactly know what fuels that particular action, but it's an exercise of guessing, and then when we have a chance, we can maybe clarify what their need is in that moment, right? Does this necessarily mean that we have to be accepting of all kinds of behavior, even if we don't really like it, or if it's hurtful, causing pain to others?
What a great question. And Deeksha, I am celebrating when people were doing that that poll, the understanding that people were demonstrating. You know, this is what we're talking about, isn't it? To have the willingness to understand what might be a deeper longing in somebody, what we call needs or values. And I just loved that people seem to be getting that so fast. It's a real celebration. So I guess the short answer to your question is, do we need to accept the behaviors? Is no. We don't have to accept the behaviors. This is where in Heartful Communication we make a very clear distinction between the underlying need, that is the motivator, which is positively contributing to life in its pure form, in its pure energy, you might say. You know, if somebody has a longing to be included or to have significance, you see, those needs matter, and we all share them. But where the problem comes is what we call the strategies, the way that somebody might choose, consciously or unconsciously, to try to fulfill that need. That's where the difficulty comes. So that distinction is vital. And the compassionate way, though, is like how to bring the love into this, starts with the willingness to try to understand at the deeper level what might be behind those really unfortunate, tragic strategies in some cases that people might use to try to get their needs fulfilled. I wonder if I can I just tell a little story about this, if I may, Deeksha, because it moved me very deeply. I did some work some years ago with some young people. They were mostly in their 20s in Northern Ireland. And these young people had been thrown out of school, thrown out of their homes, like thrown out of anything you could be thrown out of. They were truly like the kind of rejects of their society. They were very, very tough on the outside. This group of young people, I was asked if I would go and start sharing some NVC with them, which was quite a challenge because they didn't want to learn anything. However, we connected through humor mostly, and because I really respected them too. I liked them. Anyway, the point about this is that we were doing an exercise to try to understand somebody else. It's an empathy exercise. And the way that I often do this is I draw on a piece of paper, piece of card, 2 feet, and then I put that card down on the floor, and the person stands in those shoes, as it were, standing in somebody else's shoes, and they start to speak as somebody else in order to try to understand that person. Is this making sense? You try to become the other by standing in their shoes. So this young man, and he was as tough as boots, he had tattoos and everything was pierced that you could possibly pierce. And he had very foul language, which I will sort of soften a little bit in telling the story. So he wanted to try to understand his father, who had beaten him black and blue as a child. He hated his father. He'd run away from home at a young age. He hadn't seen his father for many years, and he had a great amount of bitterness about his upbringing and all this beating. But he had the courage to say, "Here, have a go." So he started to speak as his father. You use I, so he was his father. So as his father, he's talking to the boy, to his son. Is this making sense, right? So he's saying, my language, right? You're going to be an effing better person than I ever effing was. And he's, this young man, his hand is doing like this, like he's beating, like his father's beating. So, I had such a terrible life. You are going to have a better life. I'm going to teach you how to be a better human being. You're going to have a better life than I had. And the beating, this young man's hand was going up and down as he was beating, and then the tears came into his eyes. I was standing just next to him, and there was complete silence in this room, which was astonishing. Complete silence, respect from the other young people. And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "He effing loved me, didn't he?" And I think I said, "Yes, he effing did." And then he said, "I'm going to go try find him." I have never forgotten this story. I've never forgotten that young man. I've no idea, by the way, whether he ever did find his father. But it taught me so much about the power of compassion, the power of empathy, to be willing to try and understand somebody. It can change your life when you understand that, like he came to understand that his father cared for him. He beat him, like the strategies. Do you see what I mean? It's like the strategies that his father used to try to teach him to be a better human being didn't work. They were tragic. They made him tough. They made him bitter. They broke all the connection. But deep down, the father cared. It's just he didn't know a different way how to do this. Do you see, why I'm telling you this story? So this difference between understanding the needs and the strategies. Let's try to understand the longing that somebody might have. It brings this compassion. It's like a gateway. Empathy is like a gateway into compassion when we really try to understand with our hearts.
Liz, I would really like to ask you, how do we find out what people's needs are? This was a really interesting story, and could you explain that? Like, how do we find the needs behind that person's behavior?
Well, okay, so first of all, you listen, but you listen deeply, not just to what people say, but what they don't say as well. Because it may be these needs are often very deeply hidden. People often express what they don't like, you know, in the form of kind of complaints or accusations, like, you know, you don't care about me. Right now, if you try to hear the need in there, do you see what's being expressed is what somebody doesn't like? So this is one of the clues that you can use to be able to sense into what it is that they do long for. So if somebody says, you don't care about me, they're not enjoying that lack of care. So what they are longing for is care, do you see, of consideration. So in some ways you can hear needs through what people are expressing angrily or criticizing or not liking. And the other way is to tune into feelings, your own feelings and the feelings of somebody else, because those feelings, our feelings, come from our needs, don't they? It's like if you have a need or value that is being fulfilled, up will come a feeling of happiness or satisfaction or, you know, relief, whatever it is. In other words, you're going to have a positive feeling that emerges when a need is fulfilled. And the other way around, of course. If you've got a need that isn't being fulfilled, up is going to come a feeling of sadness or perhaps frustration or loneliness or despair, helplessness. Yeah, so they're completely related. The feelings and the needs are linked together. So if you can't really sense what somebody really wants, what matters to them, what their need is, sense their feelings. This will give you a very direct clue, because then you can link that down, trace it down to what that need might be. And these needs change, you know, needs evolve. So, you know, as Abhyassis, you can probably think, well, in my early days, I had perhaps a very strong need, maybe for recognition. And the more that we meditate and the more that we try to integrate the teachings of our masters about trying to become insignificant, and then the need for anonymity becomes more important, let's say, than the need for recognition. Or maybe when you're like right now, maybe you all have a very strong need for adventure, let's say, you know, which I also had. Actually, I still have. But sometimes that need for adventure then changes to a wish for inner adventures. Do you see? So needs evolve. But what matters is that we can see this difference between the needs and the strategies. And we can, if we hear those, I don't know, Santnam, does that answer your question? Through hearing what people don't like, also through tuning into feelings, that can help you identify.
Yeah, I think that really makes it really clear. Thanks a lot for that, Liz. We're now going to show you a quick video, which sort of gives us a good explanation of what's happening. I'd really like all of you to just pay attention to this video and just try and observe what this video has to show. So before we show you the video, we just need to explain one concept called get service. So get service is something that modern cars often show when they need servicing. And like a car, sometimes our eyes need servicing as well. So now we're going to just play this video. Keep an open mind and watch it.
Kid, every time I'm pulling out, he's right there. Man, someone needs to talk to his parents if they're ever at home. What is up with the traffic today? It's always, every day, this intersection's always crowded. I hate pulling out of here. Maybe some of these dumb roads. Oh, there's... Okay, so I'm not even here. Right. Great lady. The princess of parking. Oh, sure. Take the spot. Way to be considerate. Oh, you kidding me? Unbelievable. Oh.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's about time. Let's see, what do I want?
Yeah, could I add a cookie to that order?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no problem, only guy in the world. I'm sure you need your cookie. The world, your oyster, and he's serving your cookie.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you so much.
What can I get for you?
Yeah, I'll have a tall decaf macchiato.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Be $3.85. And it might take a few minutes here. We've got quite a line, obviously, and thanks for your patience.
Great.
Yeah, great. Great for me. Winning again. Unbelievable. What is that? What in the world? Oh, what am I supposed to do? How can I do anything about that? Can I even help with that? I don't.
Your coffee, sir.
I can't take this anymore. I gotta get out of here.
Hey, what?
Sorry, so sorry.
Hey, buddy, come here.
So I hope all of you enjoyed that particular video. And it kind of illustrates really well that when we are in our day-to-day interactions, we can only see a tiny sliver of the life of another person, right? We have no idea what all is going on in the background. And when a person's behaving a certain way, what might actually be going on in their mind, we have no idea about that, right? And we have all this internal reactions constantly to everything around. So on that note, I kind of want us to take a moment and think about this. So when we're in our day-to-day interactions, what is it that goes on in our mind? Right? Do we all have this similar internal chatter that this main character had in the video? I'd like all of you to just take a moment and think about that. Right? Like when we're in a conversation, for instance, and our friend is explaining something to us, right? What's going on through our mind? Right? We might be thinking about, okay, what is he saying true? Or what would I have done in that particular situation had I been there? Or what do I say next? Right? I'd like to quickly share a quote by the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. You can just have the quote on. So most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Most people listen with the intent to reply. This is a really profound quote. And I'd like to share like my personal experience in most of my conversations. When another person is speaking, often I have this tendency, right, to analyze what the person is saying. Is it true or not? Try and think about, okay, should I start correcting this person? That's what I personally do often. And sit and start wondering, what would I have done in that situation? So now I'd like to all of you to just log on to menti.com and try and think about what good listening actually looks like. So when you're in a particular conversation and you've been truly listened to, right? When you've been listened to, how did you feel? How did you know that that particular person was listening to you? So log on to menti.com and you have the code in the description of the video. I see a lot of results over here. So eye contact, absolutely. Eyes and body language, yeah. They devote their utmost attention to us, absolutely. You feel something really wonderful in your heart when a heart-to-heart connection is going on. I really like these responses. So it really shows that all of you are able to tell when you're being truly heard. Looking for a few more responses. The person gives meaningful replies to your questions, absolutely. So when a person responds to us and they reflect back something accurately, it kind of shows that, yeah, they were listening to what you had to say. So thank you for that. I'd like to just emphasize one more aspect of listening. And here I'd kind of like to emphasize on the importance of the meditative state. Thank you for the slide. So often, like all of us, most of us here are practitioners of heartfulness. And I'd like to share that, just being in that meditative state, that really helps being a good listener. Right? Being a practitioner of heartfulness often helps us get into this meditative state after our meditation, where our mind kind of clears up. And instead of focusing on our own reactions to what somebody has to say or what are we going to say next, it helps clear the mind and just take in what the other person has to say. So it really helps us become good listeners. I'd now like to ask a question to the other panelists. What do you think disconnects the speaker? All of you had answered about how do you know when someone's truly listening to you? So now I'd like to take it the other way. How do you know when there's a disconnection between the speaker and the listener?
Do you want to try it out with some responses that we usually use from habit and
Sure.
see whether you feel disconnected or what you think actually creates or breaks a connection?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to do a demo situation and maybe you can give me your responses.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hey Deeksha, last week I had this major entrance exam and I kind of misplaced my hall ticket. And so I ended up turning up 1 hour late for this exam.
Oh yeah, I know exactly how that must have felt. I've lost my hall ticket so many times. Once I didn't even find my hall ticket until the next day, so I had to take the exam again. And that was in school. But anyway, tell me what happened. Did you miss the exam too?
Well, no, I managed to write the exam, but I'm really nervous about this. This was a major entrance exam, not a school exam. And I can't, I'm scared I'll have to wait another year if I have to give this exam. I'm really nervous. I couldn't finish the paper either.
But at least you were able to write most of it, right?
Yeah, I did, but I couldn't finish it.
Okay, well, don't be worried. I think things will work out. Maybe you'll get into one of the other colleges you applied to.
Yeah, but
So,
I really wanted to get into this one. And
yeah.
I'm really worried about what my future looks like now.
Yeah, don't be so worried. For now, I think you should try to distract yourself and focus on, just wait until the result comes. For now, just watch a movie and eat some good food and you'll feel better, okay?
Okay. So if you noticed what Deeksha kind of responded to me, those are examples of circuit breakers. So you can quickly have the slide on that. So instead of acknowledging what I kind of felt in the moment, Deeksha was just crying and coming up with telling her own story that she's also misplaced hall tickets or telling me that it's no big deal, right? And I should just probably move on.
Yeah. How did you feel, Santnam?
I actually didn't like your responses. I didn't feel like opening up to you at all. And you didn't make me feel any better.
I wasn't really even listening to how you felt, right? I was just telling you not to feel whatever you were feeling. You said that you were worried, and I said, oh, don't be worried. That isn't going to really change anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did tell my own story, which obviously didn't help you. It wasn't, you weren't asking me if I had been through anything similar. I just threw it into your face there.
Yeah, it was pretty disconnecting now that I look back.
Yeah, Meghna, what else did you pick up from this?
I mean, I did notice a lot of things that we usually do where we do not let the other person finish what they're speaking. And listening to these circuit breakers that you all mentioned, I wonder whether we're never supposed to use them, right? The thing is, they all have a certain place, and the timing matters a lot. It's not that you're never allowed to tell your own story. It's not that you're not allowed to give a suggestion, maybe, or an advice. Everything has a time and place, right? Depending on the context. And before we put ourselves into a place where we start expressing what is alive within us, it would be ideal to receive the other person, right? Try to sense into what they're feeling and needing and check with them. For instance, if you think something that you experienced could help them in their own story, in their life, ask them. Maybe, this is something that I had experienced. Do you think it would help you if I shared that with you? But do this after you have taken the time out to listen to the other person, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And sometimes it is possible that we're confused about what to do, what not to do. And at that time, it might just simply be helpful to be there with that person and show some compassion.
Yeah, maybe if Deeksha had actually listened to whatever I had to say.
And that's why, listening is very important.
Yeah. I guess if Deeksha had actually waited to hear me out entirely, and then had I asked her, okay, did you have a similar experience? Then I would probably not have felt as disconnected as her just jumping in and interrupting me. Right? So now that we've looked at interactions that are disconnecting, Liz, would you like to tell us about what are the kind of interactions that really connect the speaker and the listener? Would you like to throw some light on that?
Well, rather than the circuit breakers, huh? When you were just talking there, I was remembering another, how you used a Stephen Covey quote, Santnam earlier. I was remembering another one from his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Do you know the 5th habit? Anybody know the 5th habit? Any of you guys? It's a test.
To understand.
Yeah.
Seek to understand before being understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like, there he is telling us that to be effective, try to understand, just like you were both saying, all of you were saying, try to understand before you yourself are understood. It's really a helpful thing to remember, isn't it? Listening. I mean, I guess if there's only one thing which we ask or hope that people would take away from a Heartful Communication workshop, if there was only one thing, I think Daji would say, listen. To learn how to really listen and accompany somebody and have empathy for somebody else. That's it's number one. Having that intention is so important. The intention to connect with what's in somebody's heart, even if they're furious with you. You can empathize with somebody who's angry with you, providing you have really worked at this inner condition of maintaining your inner state, which is why Daji has said so clearly that the practice of AEIOU after our meditation, of trying to integrate, hold on to, grip that meditative condition, he has said that AEIOU will bring forth all we're looking for in heartful communication. I mean, it's so, here's a message for everybody out there. If you're not yet practicing integrating the AEIU that Darji has offered us, please do start experimenting with it, because it's one of the things that makes a massive difference to being able to keep centered in very challenging circumstances. Because when we're trying to understand somebody, remember, we don't have to agree with them. That empathy is not agreement. You can empathize with somebody with whom you totally disagree if you're willing to. This is the thing, isn't it? Is the sincerity that you may have to want to understand, to want to listen, that matters more than getting the words right, for sure. That intention to connect, to understand, will convey itself. So we listen as quietly as we can, letting go of as much of what you called, Santnam, the inner chatter. Instead of planning our next comment, most of us are listening, planning on, or just waiting for the person to draw breath, so that we can jump in. But it's that meditative state that we try to bring into our interactions. And of course, a lot of the time we don't manage it, but that's what we're trying to do. And when you have really heard somebody, is it your experience, you guys, that the next person then is more willing to hear you? If you've listened to them, are they more likely to want to listen to your point of view also, or your experiences also? So it works both ways in that way, doesn't it? So
because you've allowed their internal chatter to come out. So now when you speak, they don't have any internal chatter going out and waiting to escape.
Okay. Yeah. So the space, I think you're saying, Deeksha, yeah? The space for you to meet, which is a bit like that Rumi quote, by the way, isn't it? Out beyond having these ideas and these judgments and these thoughts, there is this field, there is this space, where we can connect. And the key is listening. And what Darji has said is that listening, I mean, this is a huge thing, can reduce the burden of samskaras. I think we've got this on a slide, haven't we? There we go. I mean, take this in, folks. This is a big one. By listening properly to somebody, we can reduce the burden of their samskaras. My guess is actually that we probably reduce the burden of our own also through having this practice of listening with empathy. Thank you, Ananya. So, what is this? What is this empathy? This willingness? I don't know. I'd love to hear from you. I know. Would you like to say, any of you, what do you think empathy is?
Taking the time to put yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to experience the world like they would.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think
while
the story that Liz told earlier was exactly that, right? And I found that very powerful for someone to be able to put themselves in the shoes of someone they really don't like or they're hurt by. And if you can do such a drastic, radical empathy, then it should be maybe a little easier to connect with people we do like, and we sometimes don't manage to do even that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think empathy is definitely looking at the world through somebody else's eyes and trying to understand what are they seeing in that particular situation, no matter, even if they're very different from me. Like, I've tried this a few times, and I even tried just doing it theoretically, and it does work. So I really agree with the whole empathic process.
When you say it does work, Santnam, what do you mean it works?
I think I've been able to see, okay, I'm able to understand where this person's coming from, even if my initial reaction is like, okay, that person is definitely crazy. So that's what I found really interesting about trying to empathize with someone else.
Yes, yeah. So we get a sense of their world. It's not that we know exactly, though, is it? Not exactly. It's like, this is why I don't really enjoy it when somebody says to me, I know exactly how you feel. And I want to say, no, you don't. Because they can get us a feeling of it, a taste of it, but not exactly. So it's something just to be aware of, that if we jump in and we say, yes, I understand, yeah, I totally understand, I know exactly, what you're going through, that can actually feel like a disconnect.
Yeah, a lot of times. And just to add to what you're saying, it is possible that we have experienced similar situations and we might not be able to exactly understand what they're going through, because everyone has different needs at, even at the same time, possibly even in similar experiences. And even though I could not have gone through the same experience, I could still be able to empathize with them with this approach of needs consciousness that is there.
Yeah, there you go. Spot on. Wonderful. So the other part that I wanted to talk about is about empathy, is self-empathy. Because this is another of the deep, what could you say? It's more than a tool, it's an approach, isn't it, in heartful communication, which you've all experienced, haven't you? Is how we can use the same approach of listening to ourselves as listening to others, and being willing to really take note of how we're feeling, not indulging it, but just, okay, this is what my feeling is, and how that feeling can lead us down to what might be important to us, down into our needs. So this self-empathy process, I don't know about you guys, but I find it particularly helpful when I'm triggered. If I get upset or irritated by something. So I have, when that happens, maybe we can all do this together. I'm irritated by something and my mind starts to make judgments, okay? Usually about somebody else or myself, what I've done or said. Yeah. Now those negative thoughts which I have going on, if I listen to them, if I listen to myself saying, oh, you make such a mess, I'm was remembering how I used to get so cross with my son, my teenage son, when he was living at home, and it would come out, angrily, and I would be upset. And look at all this mess. When we listen to those words, and we're doing the self-empathy process, we can connect with our feelings of annoyance. It might be irritation. Something's unfulfilled, and that thing which is unfulfilled is the need, not the strategy that the other person has chosen, right? This is the understanding that let me connect to what my value is. If I just go on with that example of my son, if I take some deep breaths and feel into that, I get in touch with my own longing for peace, for order in my surroundings. Now that need lives in me. It's part of me. It's part of my way of being. Do you see? Never mind in some ways what somebody else is doing or not doing. That's a value I can hold dear for myself. When I get in touch with that, and we call it sitting in the needs in the self-empathy process, I usually find that my anger dissipates and something else comes, and it might be a kind of sadness, regret, or maybe a little helplessness, but it's not the anger. And then I can look for other ways to try to get that need fulfilled, other than by wanting this person to do this thing in this way at this time, right? This is right. Do you connect with this? This is how we trap ourselves, isn't it? We think, I can't get my need met unless this person does this in this way. Well, it's not true. when we get in touch with the need, we say, oh my goodness, there might be 15 different other ways that I could try to fulfill that need, other than this particular one which I'm insisting on. So, you know, human beings have got relatively few shared universal needs, but infinite number of strategies for infinite number of how people try to get their needs met. And that is where conflict lies. Not at the level of needs, because those needs are shared. It's how the need is trying to be fulfilled that we fight about, what we call the strategies. So, you know, it's very helpful to remember that, isn't it? That when there's a conflict, it'll be about what people are saying and doing, or not saying or not doing, whether it's little or big. But when we go down to those underlying needs and can relate to them, listen for all of them in a conflict, and then we try to find what we call the third way, not A's way or B's way, but the third way, a way through that conflict, which tries to take account of everybody's needs. Is this making sense? Well, I know you know this because we've talked about the whole idea of conflict. Yeah. So I think what I'm really also trying to say is that this is not a magic wand. You know, we need self-empathy, we need self-connection at times when our needs are not being fulfilled. Because heartful communication, like anything else, is not a magic wand. You know, it doesn't mean that suddenly you're going to get all your needs met. I think Darji would tell us that wouldn't be good for us anyway, spiritually. But what it does do, in addition to increasing the likelihood that everyone's needs can be met, is it enables you to live with the pain of unfulfilled needs. It enables you to live with that through the processes of course, of meditation, of cleaning, of self-connection, of self-empathy. So do you see, it works on all levels. All levels. Are you going to demonstrate this, by the way, in empathic listening?
Sure, absolutely.
Why don't you do that? Because you did a lovely demo of circuit breakers of how not to listen.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to take a few moments and show us an example of how you could listen with empathy?
Yeah, in fact, we'll demonstrate the same situation, and then
okay.
Maybe that way it'll become very clear the difference between the disconnecting response and a more empathic response. So let me start. Hi, Meghana. You know, last week I misplaced my hall ticket for my college entrance exam, and I ended up showing up 1 hour late for my examination. You know?
You sound quite worried and even scared, maybe, right? Because you wanted some sort of security?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I'm really scared of taking a drop year, you know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to my future now because I missed half the paper. My paper is incomplete, and I don't know what college I'll end up getting because of this.
Are you feeling a little uncertain, maybe? Because you really long for some clarity about what your future holds for you.
Absolutely. I really feel uncertain right now about what's going to happen going forward. And yeah.
And getting into this college probably would be a step forward in building your career and getting a more stable life.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been, but I couldn't make it. I'm kind of messed up over here. So here I kind of like to explain for a moment. If you notice what Meghana was doing in this particular example, especially in contrast to the earlier example with Deeksha, right? Meghana took a moment here to try and acknowledge what are the feelings that I have, right? I have a certain amount of, I'm worried about my future in this particular situation. I'm really uncertain. I feel strongly uncertain about what's going to happen going forward. I have this desperate need for like certainty, some amount of security. And in this particular demonstration, Meghna responded empathically, where she kind of acknowledged those feelings and needs that I had. She didn't exactly solve my problem or tell me what to do. But the idea of heartful communication and empathic responses is that you at least acknowledge the feelings and needs that a person has. And I would be honest, in this particular situation, I felt a lot better than how Deeksha made me feel using circuit breakers. So with that example, I hope you all got a good idea of what listening looks like, what poor listening is, and what proper empathic listening is. So now we have some time for our question and answers. We believe the live chat has been open for the last 10-15 minutes for you to post your questions. So Liz, we're going to start off with some of the audience questions for you.
Okay, right, what have we got?
So the first question that I have over here, which I think is pretty interesting. How do you deal with your disagreement even after you understand why they might have done that? So let's say you're in a particular situation and you understand the needs of the other person, but you still have this huge disagreement with them. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. The bit that we don't have time to cover in this webinar is how we express ourselves without judgment and blame. We wanted to make sure that in such a short time that we put the focus on listening to the other and on empathizing, because that's what really makes the most profound difference. And if we had more time, what we would also be able to demonstrate and share with you is how we also express ourselves. So with this question, I'm just looking at it again. Okay, you understand the other person, but what is missing is that you haven't been able to express what matters to you. So when we learn heartful communication, we learn how to also express our own feelings and needs and to make specific requests. And there's an art to this, in that most people, when they make requests, which in heartful communication is one step towards meeting the need, how it comes out often is as a demand. So if you make a request that is based on your own needs, that is your values, and you make the request specific, doable, small step, and negotiable, you're into the dance of communication, as it were. You know, this is the dialogue, isn't it, of the dance of communication, where both people now are into interaction. But there are particular things about how we express feelings that, for example, we wouldn't say, I feel that you are. People think, oh, I'm expressing my feelings when I say things like that. But you're not. You know, a feeling would be one word. You know, I feel disappointed, or I feel alone, or whatever it might be. But when we say things like, I feel that you should, or I feel we are, or you know, those aren't feelings, but that's often how they come out. So be alert to what we call pseudo feelings. Then we express a need, and then we may make a request, and then you're in this dialogue. Being willing, by the way, to hear the word no. So when we teach making requests in heartful communication, we make sure that people understand that making a request is not with the demand energy that says, and this has to happen. Because if you get some form of a no coming back from the other person, in whatever way that no is expressed, we learn to hear that no differently. But that no is actually simply another need. So when somebody says no, it's because they've got a different need alive in them in that moment. That's what no means. It means something else matters to me. Do you see? It doesn't mean you're personally rejected or you're a bad person and I'll never love you again. So in a disagreement, you know, often we get triggered into this feeling of, oh, you know, the other person is rejecting me, doesn't like me. But when we get these kickbacks, these no's, what we try to do is to get interested in what's behind that no. we call it getting curious instead of furious. That mostly, you know, we have a reaction when we get something coming back at us. But if we get curious and interested in what that need might be, do you see how now we're starting to get all the needs out on the table in a disagreement? Once you get all the needs heard, that is hearing the other, understanding the other, and including now being able to express what matters to you also, then you've got the communication going. Okay, how's that, Santnam?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that answer.
Well, it's like a little opportunity to pop in a bit more about Heartful Communication as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I really love that way of your answering questions. I mean, it really teaches people things as well while you're just answering their query.
Okey
So
doke.
I have another question which is very relevant to the current times.
Right.
To the current times that during this pandemic, we've all been on chat a lot more. So we'd love to know your thoughts and tips on how we practice heartful communication over text, because most of our conversations aren't face-to-face. I mean, most of our
Don't do
conversations
it.
are on text.
It's probably the fast answer. Oh my goodness, the misunderstandings that can result from those 4 words, isn't it, that we type so quickly. And when I see you young people, you know, doing it with your thumbs and fingers at the speed of light, I think, what kind of responses? You know, there's no there's no pause. So, I mean, what can I say except that? Why don't we use the power of pause for a moment and let those flying fingers that you've all got just, you know, take a bit of a rest? And the same thing is think, am I willing to try to understand the effect of my words on somebody? If I'm willing to have that sensitivity, there's an awful lot of things I'm probably not going to write in a text. And certainly that I hope that I would pause for a moment before I write it. In my view, but remember I'm ancient, you know, and I don't really know all these technological things. The same principles that we apply to outer communication, why can't they apply to writing texts and emails and all the rest of it? Why not? Why can't we still have the intention to care, to be expressing ourselves, you know, with respect, with care, even if it's only in a few words, and at the same time have an awareness? I wonder what the effect of this might be. Am I willing to try to understand that before I press the magic button send? You know.
I think, okay, so next time I'll be a lot more careful when I'm texting, and I'll probably
Oh,
take
will
some
you?
time.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll take some time before and think through my texts. I think I'll keep that one in mind, Liz. The next question I'd like to ask you, which is something that's a lot of people have in mind, including me, that it's a lot easier to deal with situations like traffic and road rage of others, you know, like strangers in a coffee shop, for example. But it's so much harder to practice heartful communication with your family. You know, when you have these tendencies and there's this repetitive behavior. Like personally, I still struggle on some level when there are repetitive behaviors from my parents. And that's where even after doing a lot of heartful communication, those are the tricky parts where I found it really hard to implement this. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I wish I could see everybody who's behind this little camera. I believe there's about 1,000 people there, but I bet if I was to say to everybody, put your hand up if your hardest, toughest situations in relationship are with your nearest and dearest, with your family. I can imagine just about everybody's hands go up, because this is where the challenge lies, isn't it? And this is also what Darji talks a lot about, is the need for, actually the word that he talks about is impeccability in our family life. Now, it's a lofty aspiration. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that along with all the rest of you, the same thing is true for me, that this is where it gets hardest. And I think it's because we don't have the kind of shells or defenses or skins, you know, that often we have allowed to develop in our less intimate relationships. You know, we have some kind of a protection around us often in our other relationships, but our family know us often inside out. There's nowhere, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. Therefore, the need for us to be authentic is really very powerful, isn't it? Heartful communication will enable us to become more and more, I think, authentic in who we are and how we express ourselves, because we're going to be removing a lot of this blame and judgment, and the testing ground is going to be with our parents, because they get under our skins, or with our partners, or whatever it is. And this, to me, is why everything which Darji offers us, with retaining our meditative condition, with practicing AAIOU, with trying to grip onto our condition, of using pause, of remembering that, in heartfulness, we have so much that helps us with this, don't we? We have our maxims. We've got the maxims that tells us that miseries are divine blessings, that it's there for our own benefit. We've got Maxim 6, that treat all people as brethren. We have so much in heartfulness that supports us to manage our family relationships. So it seems to me that what Darji has told us all about practice, practice, practice is probably the root of it all. And then when you add in or blend in and weave in the willingness, to try to understand people at another level, and plus the skills which we teach in Heartful Communication of how to express ourselves without blame and judgment, it's like the whole thing then weaves together. And it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not fast. Having said all that, Santnam, we get masses of feedback. I mean, I've lost count over the years of the feedbacks that I've read or heard, or people have told me face to face, of the radical changes that have happened in their family life as a result of trying their best to implement Heartful Communication. I mean, really radical thing. I mean, somebody wrote to me not very long ago, said, with somebody in the West, and said, I have been able to go home for Christmas, they were saying, for the first time in 6 years, because I've learned how to equip myself. And he said, and I went home for Christmas and it was a success. We were able to keep harmony. So, I mean, if we had time, I could tell you 1,000 stories.
I think we do have some time, so it'll be a great.
Yeah, you tell them. I mean, you know them as well, don't you? The examples.
Yeah, some of them.
But start small. Start small. With small things. Start, working with the self-empathy. Start having a pause, noticing the reactivity that comes, and using all the practices that Darji gives us.
So I think you mentioned a lot about the maxims, and I think earlier you talked about AIOU.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little more about how heartfulness helps with heartful communication, as well as the other way around, how heartful communication helps us with our spiritual practice? I think a lot of the audience would really like to know more about that.
Hang on, let me get this right. What are you saying? How
heartfulness helps with heartful communication? You'd mentioned a lot about that. Could you give us some more about that, as well as the other way, how heartful communication helps us with our spiritual practice?
Okay, right. So first of all, we've got the meditative condition, haven't we? That's number one. That's going to help us, and the practice of integrating and gripping onto our condition through AIOU. That brings us to a much more refined condition, and from that more refined condition, if we're constantly working on it, our interactions are going to become more refined. So we've got that. But the other thing that we haven't yet mentioned is Lalaji's principles of conversation. Now, this is something which I hope that most people who are listening, watching this, are at least familiar with and know that it exists. If you haven't yet read Lalaji's Principles of Conversation, and of course Darji's been talking about it in his Truth Eternal sessions, please read it. In fact, what did Darji say, that he's read it 100 times, or he recommends that we all read it 100 times? Because here is Lalaji's advice on how to maintain that steady, even state, which he calls about being in line or in tune with the current of reality, and how we can gradually learn to practice. We do this, by the way, in the programs, in the Heartful Communication programs, is we practice implementing Lalaji's Principles of Conversation. And one of the things that's most powerful that he says at the end of his article is to have no inclination to want to hurt anybody's heart in the least. To have no wish to cause any harm. And then he talks about how we can express ourselves in this much more balanced, calm way. So that's another of the heartfulness practices, which is, or teachings, you could say, that will help us enormously in our communications. So I think we've covered the main things there. Is that all right?
Yeah. Could you talk also about how heartful communication has helped with your own spiritual practice? I think any personal experiences you'd like to share over there?
One of the things that heartful communication is focusing on a lot of the time is self-awareness, isn't it? That it's like we know that we can't change something that we're not aware of first. So that focus in heartful communication of noticing, becoming much more conscious of how we are operating, how we're thinking, how we're speaking, how we're behaving, that contributes immensely to my own inner refinement. You see, it's like that self-awareness, which we're trying to have coming from the focus of the heart. So this is the tuning of the heart, isn't it? That can happen through, it's like it happens both ways round. So heartful communication, this is why Darji said, and it's astonishing that he says this, that it's raising people's spiritual conditions because of people wanting to stay in their hearts, connect from the heart level, wanting to listen, intending to come from a place of compassion. So I find it really wonderful that he's working in this way, from the inner to the outer and to the outer to the inner. It's very humbling.
Thank you very much, Liz, for a lot of those answers. We have one last question for you. So there's this question that's come up in the chat. We do compromise and take a step back often. When we are faced in a situation, we try and take a step back and maintain that particular relation where we value the relation more than the disagreement that we may have. But what do you do in a situation when someone takes you for granted, right? Because you're always just putting your needs aside, trying to avoid conflict as much as possible. And then the other person starts taking you for granted and starts becoming careless. How do you deal with such a situation?
Well, first of all, Santnam, when you said compromise and putting your own needs aside, please remember that heartful communication doesn't teach that. It doesn't say to put your needs to one side. What it enables us to do is to bring all the needs into the field, to be willing to express our own as well as to hear others. So it's like, when we're taken for granted, to use that phrase, is that because in some way we're not receiving any appreciation, I imagine, or any sense of perhaps inclusion. Usually it's to do with appreciation for the efforts we're making, or how we're behaving, or who we are. And that, often people get angry when they're not appreciated. But if you use this process of self-connection and you go down through the feelings of anger or resentment, what you find in there is sadness. And that is the more authentic feeling. Remember, anger is a secondary emotion, that it comes on top of something else. It's much easier to feel anger than it is to allow yourself to feel vulnerable. But once we get in touch with what those feelings are underneath anger, and we express the vulnerability, it's the vulnerability that will connect us. So if you say to somebody, not, you're always taking me for granted, I'm fed up with this, you're just going to have, a battle. But can I tell another little story? Because it's just coming to my mind about exactly this. There was a lady.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
There was a lady who came to one of the workshops. And this was some years ago, and she said to the group, this is in the days when you could actually meet people live and do a training, with real human beings in front of you. And she said to the group, I've been married to a newspaper for the last 15 years. And so the group said, what do you mean you've been married to a newspaper? And she said, well, this is the taking for granted. My husband comes home from work every day. I've been alone all day in the house. He comes home from work and he makes himself a cup of tea and he sits down with the newspaper up in front of him. And I don't hear anything from him for at least half an hour or longer. And she said, I'm just so fed up with this, And so the group said, well, what have you done, to try to make him more careful of, I'm looking at the questions, well, of your feelings. And he said, well, of course I have screamed at him. I've been angry. I've nagged at him. I've complained. I've wept. She said, once I ran away, I just ran out of the house, but he didn't care. He didn't come and look for me. I had to sort of creep back. And then she said, once I set fire to the newspaper. I just lit the newspaper. But she said nothing worked. So in the workshop, she practiced how she would express her situation, her feelings and her needs, and how she would make a request that was different from how she'd done it before. So the group said, off you go. She went, because it was a 2-day thing, and she came back the next morning. We said, how did you get on? And she said, well, he came in as normal and, went behind the newspaper. And she said, this time I sat down next to him and I said, John, when you come in and you read the paper without speaking to me, keeping her voice absolutely neutral. It's not when you come home and read the paper without speaking to me. You see, you can wreck the whole thing by your tone of voice. You can get the words right, but the tone can ruin it. So very neutrally. Then she said, I feel lonely. Not I feel that you are uncaring. Not that I feel you're taking me for granted. You see the difference in the accusation, and here's the vulnerability being expressed under the anger. I feel really sad and lonely. And she linked her feeling to her need. And she said, because I just long for closeness and companionship with you. Very simple. And she said, I didn't even get to my request because bang, the newspaper went down. And he looked at her and he said, I didn't know you felt like that. Big hugs. She said, how is it? And he said, 15 years. And so this, do you see? So this, my reply is that if you are willing to express yourself in this way, express the vulnerability, this is what will connect you. I love that story.
We've heard that story from you before, Liz.
You have.
It's very touching.
Yeah, I know.
It's a very touching story.
It's simple because it's everyday life in a family, isn't it? It's nothing grand. Of course, I have big stories about big grand things, but it's these little ones that we make.
And it's funny how even these small, we're so scared to be vulnerable with our own loved ones, even for these small things that matter. They're small, but they matter a lot to us, and we still don't take the time out to express what is actually alive in us.
That's right. Yeah. Hopefully,
So,
after this program, or whatever we call this webinar, perhaps people might have a go.
yeah, hopefully, absolutely. So I think, Liz, we're done with our questions. I think I'd really like to thank you for taking all of these questions. And I'd really like to thank the audience as well for pouring in your questions in the chat. So we're reaching the end of our webinar. Liz, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Oh my gosh.
I have a question.
Right.
I mean, not a surprise one, but since you said you would like people who are watching the webinar to give it a go and to practice, you had come up with a kindness challenge that you wanted to share with everyone.
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, thank you, Deeksha. Darji talks a lot now these days about kindness. And he's asked us to integrate the whole theme of kindness more and more into our Heartful Communication offerings. To me, you probably remember from the Omega days, it's one of the things that I used to, as a group of students was graduating from school, I often was asked to give a talk. And one of the things that I usually said was, please go out from this school as kind people, number one. Successful people, yes, but the world doesn't really need any more successful people. It's got plenty of them. But kindness, kind people, gestures of kindness, tiny, big, doesn't matter. That's what we need. Don't we need that desperately, desperately, desperately now? So so I wanted to offer all of you who are watching this, 2 little kindness challenges, if you'd be willing to take them on. One is, if you know anybody who you sense is lonely, alone, perhaps people avoid this person, maybe you don't choose to be with them, maybe you don't like them very much, but somebody who you sense has been in some way shunned, would you be willing to reach out to this person and to try to get to know them? That's one challenge, to reach out to somebody. And the other thing is, if you have any strain going on at the moment, any conflict, an argument that you haven't sorted out, would you be willing to really try to make peace with that person in the next few days? Find some way to make peace with them, and perhaps to take responsibility for your part in that. So those are the 2 things I did want to end with. And I guess in a way, what I'm hoping is that people will go away from this webinar with a renewed sense of their own humanity, their heart, their capacity for love. And as Charji used to say, it only needs one candle to light the darkness. So, if we can all go out being aware that we have Master inside as the light, and to be candles of kindness as much as we can, wherever we go. I think that would be a wonderful outcome, don't you, from this? And if this is the last moment I've got to say something, what I also want to say is how much I appreciate all of you 3, and what a joy it is to work with you, to do this with you. And I want everybody out there to know how hard you 3 and many others have worked to integrate what you're learning and to really try to bring it into your lives. So, hats off to you and your courage in doing this. So I'm very appreciative. Thank you very much for inviting me into your webinar.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Are you going to do next steps then? Is that the next thing? And then a little video of Darji to end, isn't it? Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank everyone as well. And I resonate with the gratitude that you were expressing right before. I'm grateful for everything that everyone has done for this to happen, and a big shout out to all of those people who are out there listening to us today. And now that you've started your Heartful Communication journey, we wanted to offer you certain resources which would help you further this journey, right? So there are a few online self-learning courses. There is a 30-day free online introduction to NVC. And this also has a big resource library with a lot of free resources. So we do recommend that you do explore this and take advantage of it as much as you can. And there's this other online course by Miki Kashtani, Making Life Work. This is a self-learning course.
Brilliant. I really want to plug that one. It's completely brilliant.
And at the same time, you could probably pick up a book, read what NVC is, take a deeper dive into the principles of nonviolent communication. And also there are workbooks by Lucy Liu, which is called the NVC Companion Book, which gives a certain activities that you can do to flex your NVC muscles. And there's another book by Thomas, it's called Being Genuine. That is Liz recommended as well. So I do suggest that you all go through it. And last but not least, Lalaji's Principles of Conversation. You can find it online on Google. Even if you just type it out, you'll be able to get hold of the script of Lalaji's Principles of Conversations, and they are available in many books as well. And since we do like watching our videos, we can use YouTube to subscribe to Marshall Rosenberg's channel and see his videos where he talks about nonviolent communication in a lot more depth. And we've actually heard about a lot of demand that is there for Heartful Communication workshops. And we just wanted to let you know that if any workshops, as and when the workshops do come up and are available, we will be contacting you via email and invite you to register. And for this, we would need all your email IDs and names and a way to contact you. We would really suggest that you fill in the feedback form that is there in the description of this channel, of this video. And this way we will be able to reach out to you when there are workshops that do come up. And I just wanted to tell you that we would give a little sort of preference to those people who have probably taken the effort to go through a few of these resources that we did offer, because that helps us understand your interest in taking your journey further, right? On that note, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. And if anyone else on the panel wants to say the last few words before we end the video with a small message from Daji.
I think I'd really like to thank Liz for being with us through this entire webinar, as well as being a major part of our own nonviolent communication journey from school. I've learned a lot from Liz over the years, and I'm really grateful to her for being here. Thank you very much, Liz.
It's a joy, truly a joy. Thank you so much for inviting me. And we all thank him, don't we? You know, everything, for everything. Yeah. Shall we hear from him now then in a minute?
Yes, just want to remind everyone that the feedback, the link to the feedback form is not just for feedback, but also if you want to indicate your interest in any future Heartful Communication sessions, we will use that list to contact you again as and when things become available. And of course, thank you once again for being here.
Wonderful.
What comes to your mind when you come across this phrase, being one? Is it like seeing everyone as one entity? Is it like walking with your loved ones as one family? Is it like working together as one team? Is it like you feel one with that moment when everyone around you is happy? Here, Daji explains what being one really means and how we will be able to trigger a new society.
I create my own individual existence, separating myself from rest of the godly kingdom. Sublimating my ego dissolves its barriers. I become one with all. I become one with everything. Such a person who becomes one with all, one who sees all in one, though he may be alone. He may be perceived as being an alone individual. He is always with the Lord. One who is not partisan by this and that. One who is not affected by likes and dislikes. Who is no longer suffering the gravitational pulls of Pind Pradesh. Babuji's dream is to bring about such oneness, such a unity. Though we are individually separate individuals, but he liked to see us dissolve into each other. Be harmonious, respect each other at least. And with this harmony, with this unity, we will be able to create and trigger the new society.